योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिम् गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः हरिः ओम्. So in the previous session we looked at the last sutra of the third chapter, Vibhuti Pada, and next we'll be moving to the fourth chapter, which is the Kaivalya Pada. So before that, today we'll take a overview of the sutras of Vibhuti Pada and what we have gone through in it. So Vibhuti Pada, it starts by Vyasa saying that in the Sadhana Pada, among the Ashtangas, the 5 Bahirangas had been covered in the Sadhana Pada, which is Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama and Pratyahara. Next, Vibhuti Pada starts with what is Dharana. Here I would like to remind you the common conception of what is Bahiranga and Antaranga is a bit of a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation. And in the, I think around the first session of Vibhuti Pada, we had clarified what is the meaning of Bahiranga in this context. So just a reference back to that. I may touch upon this today or maybe take it later, but you can always refer to the first session of the Vibhuti Pada. So it starts with what is Dharana. So the sutra said, Desha Bandha Chittasya Dharana. So then came Dhyana. Tatra Pratyaya Ekatanata Dhyanam. So here we discussed in detail what is the difference between Dharana and Dhyanam. In Dharana, the Dhyaya Vastu or what is being cognized is constant, so that is Desha Bandha for the Chitta. And in Dhyanam, every subsequent cognition is identical to the previous. So there is an unchanging flow of cognition, which is referred to as Taila Dharavat. More details in those sessions. But Tatra Pratyayakatanata Dhyanam. And then we came to Samadhi. Tadeva Arthamatra Nirbhasam Swarupashunyam iti Swarupashunyam Iva Samadhi. So this triad of Vibhuti Pada starts with this triad of Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, because as the name suggests, Vibhuti Pada is about the Vibhutis, the Siddhis, the sort of the yogic attainments, which are higher than the normal worldly attainments. And the main upaya for those Siddhis is a process called Sanyama. So the Sanyama is made up of Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, and that is why those three were covered together. Then the fourth sutra came in and said, Trayam Ekatra Sanyamaha. So these three together is known as Sanyama. So the Sanyama as a technical term was introduced at this point, and all the Siddhis, as far as the yogic process, the Samadhi process is concerned, is coming from Sanyama. As an aside, we also had some discussion at this time as to Samadhi as part of the Ashtanga, then Samadhi as covered in the first chapter, both Samprajñata, Asamprajñata, and how the three sort of relate to each other. That was also covered at the time. So at this stage in the Vibhuti Pada, we have arrived at what is the upaya for the various siddhis. Upaya means what is the means. There are multiple means accepted by the Shastras, by tradition, through which siddhis or of different types can be attained. The yogic scheme primarily refers to Samadhi and Sanyama. So after the fourth sutra, we have arrived at this point where we understand what Sanyama means. Then, so the fifth sutra said, Tasya bhumishu viniyogaha. So there are multiple sanyamas, and as a yogi attains the sanyama on a certain dheya vastu, a certain object being meditated upon, or a certain concept being meditated upon, the next one is realized by the yogi so that he can move on to the next stage. So the samadhi process, the sanyama process is not simply one thing to be attained. There is a set of stages, and that is what this sutra points out. And this is where we saw the wonderful saying, Yogena yogo jnatavyo, yogo yoga travartate. So whenever a certain yoga, which refers to samadhi, is accomplished, the next one is to be understood through that. At that stage, the next stage is revealed, and the yogi can embark on the next stage. So tasya bhumishu viniyogaha, that was the sixth sutra. Then a clarification comes in the seventh sutra, which says Trayam antarangam purvebhyaha. So whereas the Vyasa had referred to as the first five as Bahiranga, here this is being clarified that these three, that is the Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, which constitute Sanyama, are to be referred to as Antaranga with respect to or in comparison with the first five stages. And this is the point where I can sort of remind you that here the Bahiranga Antaranga does not refer to the outer body, inner body, or any such thing, or the outer aspects of the embodiment, or the subtler inner part of the embodiment, and so on. Here the Antaranga refers to being a direct, immediate cause for the yogic stage of Samadhi. So Trayam Antarangam. So for example, the first five stages, for certain yogis who are born at a certain level because of their samskaras, they may not require the first five, yama niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, and they may be able to directly embark upon dharana, dhyana, samadhi. However, for this yoga to be attained, the dharana, dhyana, samadhi is very much part of it, and therefore it is antaranga for the samprajnata yoga process, and therefore it says trayam antarangam purvebhyaha. And then the eighth sutra further clarifies tadapi bahirangam nirbijasya. So from a nirbija samadhi point of view, where there is the no cognitive focus, because that is abhava pratyalambana, or the abhava pratyaya is what is being referred to when we come to asamprajnata samadhi. And from that point of view, these three sanyamas are actually to be attained and then through paravairagya to be discarded. Therefore, they are bahiranga. They are not an immediate cause. In fact, their existence has to be removed to be able to arrive at a nirbija samadhi. So here the meaning of antaranga and bahiranga gets clarified. So just to keep the big picture view, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, then sanyama, then the stages of the yogic process or the samadhi process, and then clarification of which ones are antaranga and yet bahiranga with respect to the nirbija samadhi. Then there is a slight change of topic where it starts by saying the ninth sutra, Vitthana Nirodha Samskarayoho Abhibhava Pradurbhavau Nirodha Kshana Chittanvayo Nirodha Parinamaha. So here, now that the concept of Nirbija Samadhi has arrived in the previous sutra, there is a discussion as to how does that come about. Chitta being a material entity made up of Prakriti, Sattva, Rajatama, which is ever changing, how does the point of Nirbija Samadhi come about? So that introduces the concept of Nirodha Parinamaha, which is front and center. Parinama means transformation. Here there is a specific type of transformation which comes about due to the vyutthana or the worldly samskaras Nirodha, which is the Samadhi samskaras, through their suppression and manifestation. When the Nirodha arises, then the Chitta goes through a certain transformation, which is known as Nirodha Parinamaha. So this sutra continues as a bit of an prasangikam. It is referred to as prasangikam, as in now that the topic has come, we touch upon a few related things. And when the Nirbija Samadhi topic came up, the related thing is how does the Chitta come to that state when we know that it is made of the ever-changing Prakriti. And this sutra clarifies, but this is through the Nirodha Parinama process, where the Nirodha Samskaras are heavily manifested and the Vitthana Samskaras are suppressed. Tasya Prashantavahita Samskarat. So, in the Nirodha state of the Chitta, what happens? Through the Samskaras, the manifestation of the Nirodha Samskaras continues in a placid, uninterrupted state. So, Tasya Prashanta Vahita Samskarat. So, there is further elaboration of the Nirodha Parinama and how it comes about. Now that the Parinama topic has come about, the other states of Chitta and how those happen is being tackled in the next sutras. So the 11th sutra says, Sarvarthata ekagratayoho kshayodayo chittasya samadhi parinamaha. So one may say that, okay, I understood how the Nirodha Parinama happened and how the Chitta came to the Nirbija state. But then what about the Samadhi state, the Samprajnata Samadhi, which is the Dharana Dhyana Samadhi process, where a certain cognitive support is held constant and that is further transformed into an Arthamatra Nirbhasa condition. How does that happen? So that Parinama is a different Parinama, different kind of transformation known as Samadhi Parinama, which is what this sutra talks about. Which is the Chitta is initially there is a Sarvarthata. It is open and cognizing everything. From that it changes to Ekagrata, where only a single cognitive locus is adopted. So the going away, fading out of Sarvarthata and the emerging of Ekagrata, that is known as the Samadhi Parinama of Chitta. So now the Parinama topic is, we are going further and further into it by having talked about Nirodha Parinama, then the Samadhi Parinama, and the 12th one sutra says, Tataha Puna Shantodito Tulya Pratyayo Chittasya Ekagrata Parinamaha. So then the question is, okay, there is certain Samadhi Parinama understood. So what is happening in this Ekagrata state? And it says there is something known as Ekagrata Parinamaha, in which it is not as if the Chitta is unchanging, because Prakriti by its very nature is ever changing. However, the change is such that the Shanta and the Udita Pratyayas are identical. So whatever is the cognition that is fading away and the new cognition emerging as part of the ever transforming nature of Prakriti, the preceding and the succeeding are exactly identical. And that kind of Parinama is known as Ekagrata Parinamaha. So with these three sutras, we see Nirodha Parinama, Samadhi Parinama and Ekagrata Parinama. And there was a detailed discussion done when we dealt with them in the sessions devoted to these sutras. Now Vyasa or Patanjali broadens this. This is Etena Bhutendriyeshu Dharma Lakshana Avastha Parinama Vyakhyataha. So here the Parinama topic is completely opened and made applicable to each and everything, to Bhutas and the Indriyas, which means everything that manifests from Prakriti. For each and every entity, there is a Dharma Parinama, Lakshana Parinama and Avastha Parinama, which can be understood through the discussion of Nirodha Parinama, Samadhi Parinama and Ekagrata Parinama of the Chitta. Now, going broader and extending what was discussed in the relation to the Chitta, now it gets discussed with relation to each and everything, everything that is made up of Bhutas, which is the earth, water, fire, prithvi, aap, tej, vayu, akasha, and as well as indriyas, which comes from the asmita element. So all of that undergo transformations, parinamas, which can be classified and understood as dharma, lakshana, and avastha parinama. And there is a detailed long bhashya on it, which you already discussed. So, having seen Sayama, etc., we looked at the Bahiranga Antaranga aspects, and then having arrived at the Nirbija Samadhi concept, having touched upon that, we delved into how the Chitta reaches those conditions, which brought about the notion of Parinama. And having reached the notion of Parinama, we looked at the three types of Parinama with respect to Chitta, which is Nirodha, Samadhi, and Ekagrata. And then having broadened that, Dharma Lakshana Avastha Parinama for each and everything. So that this was covered with the first 13 sutras. So now that the Dharma Lakshana Avastha Parinama notion came about, the natural extension is transformations of what? What is getting transformed? So there is the concept of dharmi. So this is a certain technical term. And the 14th sutra introduces and discusses in more detail. It says, Shantodita avyapadeshya dharmanupati dharmi. As transformations happen, either go away, they emerge, or they are yet to come, etc. All these transformations, the thing that continues through it, subsists through it, that is referred to as dharmi. And this dharma dharmi bhava is of a lot of interest when we look at the different darshanas from a technical soundness and consistency point of view. And here the view of yoga darshana with respect to dharma dharmi is covered in detail, and we also looked at that when we dealt with that sutra. Then there is some doubts clarification that come in the further sutras. The 15th sutra says, Karmanyatvam parinamanyatve hetuhu. So, if one may question, okay, there are all these transformations, but what decides which transformation will happen when? Why don't it arbitrarily all kinds of transformation take place at any time in a very chaotic fashion? It says there is a kramanyatvam, which is a parinama anyatve hetuhu. So there are different parinamas, different transformations, because there is a different sequence, there is a different krama that comes in, which we then discussed when we looked at the particular sutra and bhashya. So that the 15th sutra gets covered, and then comes the 16th sutra, which is the first sutra where the sanyamas, the siddhis from the sanyamas start getting enumerated and discussed. And the first one here, the 16th sutra says, Parinamatraya sanyaman atita anagata jnanam. When the yogi does sanyama on the three types of parinama, the siddhi that arises in the yogi is he gets the jnanam, the knowledge of atita and anagata. All the past and present, all of that comes in the scope of the yogi's knowledge, and that is the siddhi. The other marvelous thing that we had pointed out, often it is said that meditation, dhyana, etc. is on some object like, let's say, often used as a lotus or the sound om and so on. But here it is clearly seen that even for the very first sayama, there is so much detailed thought, the understanding of parinamas, which is so technical in nature, highly refined, highly involved. And then it is this kind of understanding, the mind has to be so cultured and so refined to arrive at or to be able to do sayama on a topic such as this. And the very first one is of that nature, which was a parinamatraya. On the three parinamas, when the sayama is done, then the yogi gets the siddhi, which is the atita anagata jnanam. So which is a sort of a great miraculous siddhi that is available to the yogi. Now, from this point onwards, multiple siddhis are described in the Vibhuti Pada. And again, as pointed out very beautifully, as the different siddhis are mentioned, the Vibhuti Pada also takes that opportunity to discuss those particular principles or topics and brings about the Siddhanta from a Yoga Darshana point of view. So different topics are touched upon. Sometimes there are multiple schools of thought, and then Patanjali and Vyasa will together establish what is the point of view of yoga and why that is the one that is sort of accepted and correct from the point of view of the Yoga Darshana. So as a reader, as a learner, we take a journey through various topics and also refined thinking behind each of those. So the second Sanyama, where such a topic comes about, is in the Sutra 17. Shabdartha pratyayanam itaretara adhyasat sankaraha tat pravibhaga sanyamat sarvabhuta rutagñanam. So this was also discussed quite in detail. It is not easy to give a brief overview, but essentially the sound or the word, the object referred to, and the knowledge that comes about. Those three are often superimposed and confused with each other. When each of them are understood in their own separate state and the sanyama on that is done, then the yogi gets a siddhi where he is able to understand the language of each and every type of creature. So sarva bhuta rita jnanam. So animals or celestial beings, each kind of communication is available for the yogi to be understood. As part of this, in the Bhashya, a brief overview of the very long and deep science of language that is there in the Sanskrit tradition with Panini's Astadhyayi, Patanjali's Mahabhashya, and so on. A very brief sort of a touch upon that, and then some of the questions there and the accepted position in the Yoga Darshana was all discussed when we touched upon this particular sutra. Then came the third Sanyama, Samskara Sakshatkaranat Purvajati Jnanam. So this is sutra number 18 in the third chapter, which touches upon samskara and the Sanyama on them. So this gives an opportunity to talk about samskaras, etc. And the siddhi referred to is Purvajati Jnanam. All the previous manifestations, often referred to as previous births or previous lives, the jnana of that becomes available to the yogi through Sanyama on the samskaras. And in the Bhashya, we discussed what are the samskaras, what does samskara refer to, and also a very nice example or story of Bhagavan Avatya, and the conversation between Jaigishavya and Avatya was discussed as part of this, which was also very interesting, but we cannot go once again in that detail here. Then Sutra 19, Pratyayasya Parachitta Jnanam. So Sanyama on the Pratyaya, or what I've been calling cognitive imprint on the Chitta. By Sanyama and the Sakshatkara of that, what happens is Parachitta Jnanam. The Jnana of the state of another's Chitta is what is referred to. And Sutra 20 clarifies a little bit. That is, Nachatat Salambanam Tasya Avishayi Bhutatvat. So this Parachitta Jnanam has certain sort of limitations or certain caveats, in the sense that the Chitta Jnanam does not come along with the cognitive imprint of that Chitta. So it is not Alambana Sahita. However, it is Alambana Rahita. So Nachatat Salambanam. So this also shows that the siddhis, often referred to as magical powers, etc., there is very careful thought. So when the Parichitta Jnanam was referred to, one may question what is within scope, what is not within scope, how come this is within scope, how come this is not within scope, and so on. So here the Sutrakara, Patanjali and the Bhashyakara have to be careful, and they do clarify wherever required. So for example, when it said Parachitta Jnanam, or the knowledge of another chitta, they didn't leave it at that. So when it says knowledge of another chitta, does that also involve the knowledge of the cognitive imprint in that chitta? And here it is said no, and with the corresponding reasoning. Okay. Then Sutra 21 it brings in the next Sanyama. Kaya Rupa Sanyamat Tad Grahya Shakti Stambhe Chakshuh Prakasha Asamprayoge Antardhanam. So this is also a wonderful Siddhi, essentially about the yogi gets the ability to go out of view, in the sense that often it is referred to as invisibility. But this sutra also talks about how that happens. It happens through the sanyama on the rupa of the kaya. Kaya means body, rupa means form. And how come? So the grahya shakti is so the ability of the body to be cognized. That is sort of suspended. So the body no longer gets cognized, and that is known as the chakshah prakasha asamprayoga. So because it does not interact with what is known as prakasha coming from the indriyas or the senses, it is no longer visible to view, and therefore yogi gets the ability to sort of disappear, so to speak. So that is Sutra 21. Then the next Sayama in 22 was Sopakramam Nirupakramam cha karma tat Sayamat aparanta jnanam arishtebhyo va. So this is another interesting thing, which there are certain terms, Sopakrama karma, and what is Sopakrama and Nirupakrama, the two types of karma, and then there are the indications of and through Arishta, which means omens, there is sort of the knowledge that is available to the yogi about death or passing away, and that was also discussed in some detail. So as you see, each of these sutras prescribe different sanyamas and different siddhis, and then as part of that, there is a variety of topics that come about and say, okay, what does this mean? How does this work? And so on, which was a very interesting discussion in each case. So in that sense, there is not a progression of a single topic, but a wide coverage of multiple topics that happens as part of the Vibhuti Pada. In Sutra 23, Maitriyadishu Balani. So by Sayama on what was referred to in the first chapter, Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, etc. Having Sayama on that gives certain balas or certain powers or capabilities. That was discussed. Also discussed was why Upeksha is not a part of the Sayamas. It is Maitri, Karuna and Mudita, those three. So that is also discussed in the Bhashya. Then Sutra 25 prescribes the ninth Sayama. Pravritya lokanyasat sukshma vyavahita viprakrishta jnanam. So there is some pravritti, the jyotishmati pravritti, etc. that had been discussed in the first chapter also. So those were under the umbrella of chitta prasadanam. Just like Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, this was also discussed in the first chapter. So the third chapter is referring back to it. But this time, those are the dheya vastu for Sayama, as an object for Sayama. And in this case, through that, pravritti haloka nyasa, by that, there is knowledge of things that are extremely subtle, so not available for cognition through normal senses, through indriyas. Those are known as sukshma. So there is knowledge of that arises, which is the siddhi. Similarly, vyavahita, which is separated, blocked from view by something else, that also becomes available for yogic perception. And something that is viprakrishta, so that is very far away, so in general not within the scope of senses, that also becomes available, and yogi gets the jnanam of that. Then Sutra 26, Bhavana Jnanam Surya Sanyamat. The Sanyama on the Surya, and also there is some discussion here about Surya, and some commentators or tradition has also associated that with the Surya Nadi and so on. But through the Sanyama on that, there is Bhuvana Jnanam. So Bhuvana means various planes of existence or various worlds or lokas. And this is covered in Itihasa, Purana, even in some of the Upanishads, etc. Various types of celestial beings and their worlds, their powers and abilities. So there is a long bhashya that gives a wonderful overview of all, sort of a summary of this part of the tradition and the shastras that we get to understand, which we had covered in detail when we talked about this sutra. Then moving on to the 27th sutra, Chandre Tara Vyuha Jnanam. So having had Sanyama on Surya, there is a Sanyama on the Chandra, and that is of the Tara Vyuha. And there is also a brief discussion on why this had to be a different sutra and so on. So that is covered there in a very short sutra there. And Dhruve Tadgati Jnanam. So in the same strain, in the same topic, this refers to Sanyama on the Dhruva Tara, which is in English referred to as a pole star or the one that is static. And by Sanyama on that, the Gati or the movement of the nakshatra, the taras, becomes part of the realization. So Dhruve Tara Gati Jnanam. Then it moves to the parts of the embodiment, Nabhi Chakre Kaya Vyuha Jnanam. So the Nabhi Chakra. So this is also sort of indicative of the various other chakras, etc., discussed in other texts and other traditions and so on. And we see here that the Yoga Sutra and the Bhashya very much recognize that, even though they may not go into the exact same terminology or exact same detail and style, but broadly it is definitely referred to and recognized. So Nabhi Chakre Kaya Vyuha Jnanam. So Nabhi refers to the navel region. There is the reference to the chakra there. Chakra has multiple meanings. It is referred to as a wheel, a formation, or a complex of things, just like we say a shopping complex. So similarly, the chakra is multiple entities sitting together, working together. So the Nabhi Chakra, there is a Kaya Vyuha Jnanam, the various layers of the embodiment. There is Siddhi and Sakshatkara of that. Kantakupe Kshuttipasa Nivrittihi. That is the 30th sutra, which talks about the Kantakupa, which is the pit of the throat. So Sanyama on that gives the Siddhi that the yogi is freed from hunger and thirst. And Kurmanadyam Stairyam. From the Kurmanadi, it gets Stairya. Stairyam, it means to the ability to be completely, perfectly still. So that Siddhi, solidity, stability, etc., comes from Sanyama on the Kurmanadi. Murdha Jyotishi Siddha Darshanam. So the Murdha means the light itself in the Murdha, which is the head region. So on the light that there is, the Sanyama on that. So the light itself is something available for view by the yogis, such as Shirak Kapale Antaschidram Prabhaswaram Jyotihi. So the inner light in the head region from as viewed from sort of beneath the skull to the yogi, the Sanyama on that particular light makes the Siddha or the Divya Purusha, so that the divine celestial beings, divine great yogis, the yogi is able to see them and then interact with them. So the Siddha Darshanam happens through that particular Sanyama. Then comes a marvelous sort of opening where it says in Sutra 33, it says Pratibhadva Sarvam. So there is a certain type of Jnanam known as Pratibham Jnanam, which is also referred to as Tarakam. So it is said to be as a precursor to the Vivekajam Jnanam, the Jnanam arising from Viveka Khyati, which refers to the realization of the distinction between the Purusha and the Buddhi Sattva or the Chitta Sattva in its purest form. So that is the greatest sort of realization known as Viveka Khyati. That Viveka Khyati leads to a certain Jnanam known as Vivekajam Jnanam. this pratibham refers to something that is a precursor to that. Just like the light in the dawn is a precursor to the sun that is going to rise. This is the pratibham jnanam. And here it is said, all the various siddhis and jnanas referred to earlier is available through the pratibha. So when the pratibha arises, all of these different realms of knowledge discussed earlier are available to the yogi or are attained by the yogi. That is pratibhadva sarvam. Then in the 35th sutra, the next sayama is mentioned, sattva purushayoho atyanta asankairinayoho pratyaya vishesho bhogaha pararthatvat swartha sanyamat purusha jnanam. So there is a purusha jnanam that arises. And how is that? So sattva purushayoho atyanta asankirnayoho pratyaya vishesho bhogaha. So the sattva, which is chitta even in its purest form, and the purusha are entirely different, it says. However, if it is cognized as being the same, whereas the chitta thinks it is the purusha, so there is sort of the aspect of avidya and asmita, which is also referred to in the first chapter as a vritti sarupyam that happens. If that happens, there is bhoga, or all the experiences of life, joy, sorrow, etc. However, swartha sanyamat, the sanyama on the purusha in its pure form, that leads to purusha jnanam, the knowledge of the purusha. And the bhashya here is very interesting, where it says that even in this state, the direct view of the purusha doesn't come, in the sense that because chitta is after all a entity made up of prakriti, and therefore it ends with the wonderful line from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where it says Vijñātāram are kena vijaniyat. So there's a very sort of a deep, insightful philosophical discussion here in the 35th Sutra and its Bhashya, which we can't touch upon now, but referring you back to it so that the glory of this particular Sutra is well understood along with the Bhashya. Then comes the 36th Sutra, which is Tataha Pratibha Shravana Vedana Adarsha Aswada Varta Jayante. So from this, it says, from this particular Sayama and the Purusha Jnanam, there are certain siddhis, they refer to as Pratibha, Shravana, Vedana, etc., which is about the everything available for through hearing, everything available through touch, everything available through taste, and so on. Sort of the complete opening of the scope of what can be cognized through the senses. That is available, and that is referred to as a siddhi in Sutra 36. Then again, sort of a point is made in the 37th Sutra, that says, Te samadau upasarga vyutthane siddhayaha. So it says all these siddhis, they are glorious, marvelous, but note that in the worldly plane, worldly existence, they are definitely great and marvelous, but from a samadhi point of view, they are actually impediments. So Te samadau upasargaha. So that cautionary point is made in the 37th Sutra. Then comes the next one, 38, that says Bandhakarana Shaitilyat Prachara Samvedana Cha Chittasya Parasharirāveshaha. The entering of the chitta into a different body. How can that happen? So Bandhakarana Shaitilyat, by the weakening of whatever is causing bondage, and Prachara Samvedana, by understanding of how the chitta can move, by the realization of that has come through Samadhi, the yogi can have the chitta move into a different embodiment. And this is also something that we discussed to quite some length in dealing with that sutra. Udana Jayat Jalapanka Kantakadishu Asangaha Utkrantischa. So this refers to the Udana Vayu, and as part of this, all the Vayus are mentioned. What are these 5 Vayus? Why are they so named? In which region of the body do they exist and function, etc. So that is touched upon as part of the Bhashya. And then the Siddhi is mentioned, which is the being free of problems related to um, the water, mud, slush, thorns, etc., and their upward ability to move upward, utkrantihi. So that is referred to in this Sutra 39. Now, having touched upon Udana, next one is about Samana. Samana Jaya Jvalanam. So through the Sanyama on the Samana Vayu, there is Jvalanam, which is Tejasvita. There is a dazzling glory that comes to the yogi. Shrotraakashayoho Sambandha Sanyama Divyam Shrotram. So this is again a sort of a technically interesting point, which talks about the relation between the sense of hearing and the Akasha Tattva. Once that relation is understood and that becomes the object of Sanyama, then there is divine hearing. So divine aspects are available for hearing. Divyam Shrotram. As part of this, there is some discussion, as in other darshanas, like the Nyaya Vaisheshika Darshana, how is the Indriya of Shrotra, how is that interpreted? How is the relation with Akasha understood there? Whereas in the Yoga Darshana, how is that explained? And so on, which we discussed as part of that sutra. Similarly, Kayakashayoho Sambandha Sanyamat Lagutula Samapatescha Akasha Gamanam. So here the Siddhi is the ability to move about in the skies. That comes from the Sanyama on the relation between the body and the Akasha, as well as a type of a Samapatti on a specific thing like light things and Lagutula, and that is taken in the Bhashya to cover multiple types of light things in a certain sequence and how the Samapatti process also operates. But this gives the Siddhi of being able to move about in the skies. Akasha Gamanam. Then Sutra 43, Bahirakalpita Vrittir Mahavideha Tatha Prakasha Varanakshayaha. So this is also quite interesting, where the technical term Bahirakalpita Vritti, and then which is Mahavideha. So what is Videha? What is Mahavideha? These are different sort of types of dharana. And then in this, through this, the Siddhi that happens, which is the Prakasha Varanakshayaha, which reminds us about what was discussed during Pranayama, where Tatakshiyate Prakasha Varanam. So that same covering of the inner light, that becomes feeble, weakened, and goes away. So that is a great Siddhi that comes out of this particular Sanyama. Then the Sutra 44, Sthula Swarupa Sukshma Anvaya Arthavatva Sanyamad Bhuta Jayaha. So now this also covers a lot of technical ground. It talks about the Bhutas, Prithviya, Tejavayu, Akasha, and the Jaya on them, which is the Siddhi, which comes through the Sanyama by the Sanyama on the various aspects. So the 5 aspects of the Bhutas are mentioned here, which is the Sthula aspect, Swarupa aspect, Sukshma aspect, Anvaya aspect, and the Arthavatva aspect. Of course, we won't go into each of those right now, but this goes to show that when we say earth, water, fire, air, etc., and ether, it is just not that entity and how we understand it. There are multiple things behind it, different aspects, different roles, different contexts that are necessarily to be understood, and then further Sanyama has to be done, which we have discussed when discussing this sutra, and then that gives a very, very powerful and glorious Siddhi called Bhuta Jayaha, because once one has lordship over the elements, essentially there is a lordship over all material entities that is available to the yogi. So tato animadi pradurbhavaha kaya sampat tadharma anabhijatascha. So further from this Bhuta Jaya, what happens? So there are the animadi siddhis. So the ashta siddhis are discussed here. And then there is a kaya sampat, which is discussed further again. And one is not troubled, or there is no obstacle that can come because of the bhutas and their characteristics. So that is the greatness of Bhuta Jaya. Then the Kaya Sampat that was touched upon previously, that is in the previous sutra, that gets clarified in Sutra 46, which is Rupa, Lavanya, Bala, Vajra, Samhananatvani, Kaya Sampat. So what is this Kaya Sampat? So there are certain, so when you say a body, there are certain aspects of it that can then become really reach their glorious extremes in terms of Rupa, Lavanya, and so on. And that is discussed in this sutra. Rupa is form and beauty, and which is we have discussed in this sutra. Then Sutra 47 says Grahana Swarupa Asmita Anvaya Arthavatva Sanyamat Indriya Jayaha. So having discussed Bhuta Jayaha, then the counterpart is Indriyas. So often it is Bhutendriyas. Bhutas arise from or evolve from Tanmatras, Indriyas evolve from the Asmita. And having looked at Bhutas, just looked at by Asmita I mean the Ahankara Tattva, which is also referred to as Asmita Matra. So here, just like the Bhutas had 5 aspects, the Indriyas also have 5 aspects, which is Grahana, Swarupa, Asmita, Anvaya, Arthavatva, etc. So the Sanyama on them gives Indriya Jayaha. So the first was the lordship on all material entities. Here it is on all the ability to interact with them, sense them, and so on, which is known as the Indriya. So from there is Tato Manojavitvam Vikarana Bhavaha Pradana Jayascha. So these are extremely great and powerful siddhis that comes from here. So Manojavitvam is sort of the ability to move in the speed of the mind. Then Vikarana Bhavaha refers to the ability to Indriyas, their reach extends beyond what the body is. So it doesn't depend on the location of the body at all, because Indriyas can go anywhere, reach anywhere. And then the great Pradhana Jaya, which is the Prakriti itself in its original form, which can evolve in each and everything. On that itself, there is Jaya, or there is lordship that becomes available to the yogi. The Sutra 49, Sattva Purusha Anyata Khyati Matrasya Sarva Bhavadhishthatritvam Sarva Gnatritvam Cha. So, now this is about Sanyama on the Sattva and Purusha Anyata, like we have already touched upon, the difference between the Buddhi Sattva and the Purusha. The fact that they are different, the Purusha is unchanging, ever pure, etc. The Sattva or the Chitta is coming from Prakriti, ever changing, made up of Sattva, Rajatama, and so on. So by cognizing on the Sanyama on the difference between the two, the Sarva Bhavadhishthatritvam. So there is a complete lordship known as Kriya Ishvarya on each and everything. And Sarva Gnatritvam, which is Jnana Ishvarya, all knowingness. So all of that comes to the yogi. And around this, there is also some discussion about the related topic of what is the meaning of Buddhi Sattva in its purest form, what is the meaning of Purusha, especially in this context, and so on, that gets discussed. Then Sutra 50 says, Tadvairagyadapi dosha bijakshaye kaivalyam. So kaivalyam, as we know, is the highest attainment in the yoga darshana, and as part of it says Tadvairagyadapi. So this Sarva Bhavadhishthatritvam, Sarva Gnatritvam, all of that becomes available to the yogi. But then there has to be Vairagya on that, complete disinterest, complete Vairagya means all the attachment goes away. When that happens, the dosha bijakshaya, the doshas, the kleshas, the seed of that gets destroyed. And that is when the Kaivalya process happens. And then we discussed what is this Kaivalya process. Purushasya atyantiko gunavayogaha Kaivalyam. What does that mean? And so on was discussed as part of this sutra. Then again related experiences or related things that may happen. So just like in a travel guide, it is said you may encounter this, you may encounter that. Here, so beautifully that is covered by Patanjali and Vyasa. This is Sthani Upanimantrane Sanga Smaya Karanam Punar Anishta Prasangat. So it says, okay, there are four types of yogis, and we had discussed that in detail. But there is a certain level, which is the second level, where they said the yogi is invited by various celestial beings to preside over their own worlds. Because the yogi attains that level, the celestial beings start inviting them. And when that happens, how is the yogi supposed to react? So here it is said, Sangha Smaya. So the Sangha, attachment or attraction, and Smaya, which is pride, that okay, I am being invited, that is not to be done. Why is that not to be done, etc. A very nice description about how the celestial beings will invite such a yogi and how the yogi should deal with it. And why is this applicable only to a certain sort of the second of the four stages of the yogis? Why not to the first and why not to the third and fourth? That is also an interesting discussion that happens as part of that Sutra 51. Sutra 52, Kshanatakramayoho Sanyaman Vivekajam Jnanam. So here the Vivekaja Jnanam is again discussed, but this time the Sanyama is not on the Sattva Purusha Anyata etc. Here there is the Kshana and Tatkrama. So this is a very interesting discussion that talks about the unit of time and the sequence of those units of time, what they mean, and essentially how is time conceptualized. And from that Sanyama, what is the Jnanam that comes, which is the Vivekajam Jnanam, which is essentially knowledge of everything, lordship over everything. How does it arise? And how is it related to the Sanyama, the Kshana, the unit of time, and the sequence of those Kshanas? So how is that conceptualized? Why that Sanyama will lead to Vivekajam Jnanam? It's a very interesting sort of view on Vivekajam Jnanam, which is sort of coming through a bit of a different means and still leading to the same Vivekajam Jnanam. In Sutra 53, it says, Jati Lakshana Deshaihi Anyatha Anavachchedat Tulyayoho Tatha Pratipattihi. So this Vivekajam Jnanam has a certain special ability that is not available for the other types of Jnanam. And what is that? And essentially it says the things that cannot be differentiated from each other in a normal knowledge process, you can still differentiate them through this Shanatakrama Sanyama and from the Vivekajam Jnanam. And this discussion gives a very interesting insight on sort of the overall thought process and as well as how the notion of Paramanu and the is viewed and how the Vaisheshika notion of something known as a Vishesha that inheres in each and every atom in the Vaisheshika Darshana, how is that viewed from a yogic point of view and how is that made unnecessary from the Yoga Darshana point of view. All of that is understood. Very, very fascinating to read and understand the Sutra and the Bhashya. So that is Sutra 53. Then Sutra 54 further talks about the great glories of the same Vivekajam Jnanam. It says it is Tarakam Sarva Vishayam Sarvatha Vishayam Akramam Cheti Vivekajam Jnanam. So this Vivekajam Jnanam will protect the yogi, which encompasses each and everything in each and every way. It doesn't have any sequence of knowledge. Everything is available together, etc. And so the greatness and the glories of this Vivekajam Jnanam is covered in Sutra 54. And then comes Sutra 55, which is the last sutra of the Vibhuti Pada, which then ends with Kaivalya. It's a Sattva Purusho Yoho Shuddhi Samye Kaivalyam. So in the ultimate analysis, when the degree of Shuddhi, the degree of purity of the Sattva and the Purusha are equal to each other. And in fact, Vyasa further clarifies this is regardless of whether a yogi arrived at this point through the attainment of Vivekajam Jnanam or not. If the level of purity of the Sattva and the Purusha, and what that even means to say the purity of Purusha or the purity of Sattva, what does that mean? That has also been discussed. And it says when the two are equal, that is when the Kaivalya, which is the greatest attainment in the Yoga Darshana, that is when Kaivalya happens. And in fact, that is Kaivalya. That is what the sutra says, Sattva Purusha Yoho Shuddhi Samye Kaivalyam. And with this, the Vibhuti Pada covers all the topics that was within its scope. And that was sort of a quick summary of the third chapter.
So the Vibhuti Pada commences after Sadhana Pada ends. Sadhana Pada defines and characterizes the first 5 limbs of yoga, and the last 3 limbs are left for Vibhuti Pada to discuss, and therefore Vibhuti Pada starts discussing Dharana, Dhyan, Samadhi, defining, characterizing, and the Samadhi results into various kinds of attainments for a yogi. The Samadhi is not getting Samadhi and having Samadhi, but Samadhi has its glories and endowments. And there are Jnana Rupa Siddhi and Kriya Rupa Siddhis which come in the way for a yogi. And yogi attains these glories. Exalted power of activities and exalted power of knowledge. So Jnana Rupa Siddhis and Kriya Rupa Siddhis are result of this Samadhi. Samadhi doesn't just give revelation of the support of Samadhi, but also gives certain powers. So those are called Siddhis, and therefore they are called Vibhutis, and therefore the chapter is called Vibhuti Pada. Now these Samadhis pertain to the classes which Patanjali earlier described, the class of Grahya, the class of Grahitru, the class of Grahana. Grahitru, Grahana, Grahya. So these are 3 classes which are offering supports for Samadhi for a yogi, and therefore the Siddhis of the various kind come about. So the Kriya Rupa Siddhis means ability to do in case of a yogi which is supernormal, superhuman. He can be doing so many things which human beings cannot be doing. And these are Anima, Mahima, Lagima, Garima, etc., Siddhis, which we considered his power to do something is exalted, is incredible. So those are Kriya Rupa Siddhis. There are Jnana Rupa Siddhis, which normal mortals like we cannot be getting our knowledge about. Whereas there are Jnana Rupa Siddhis for a yogi, the Parachitta Jnanam, Kaya Vyuha Jnanam, Bhuvana Jnanam, Taragati Jnanam, and in the realm of knowledge, yogi also gets certain great siddhis, that he gets incredible knowledge ability. So those are Jnana Rupa Siddhis, and with these various siddhis, while they are being discussed, Patanjali doesn't miss describing whatever metaphysical aspects come with reference to siddhis, because otherwise siddhis are considered as miracles, and for common man miracle is something for which there is no rationale or there is no reasoning behind manifestation of miracles. But Patanjali makes it a point to describe the metaphysics behind such attainments. The rationale, the reason, or the reasoning, or wherever possible the logic is presented for us to understand. So we, at some point in time, realize that miracles are not miracles. Miracles are powers of yogi who has exalted abilities in the realm of jnana and in the realm of kriya karma. So metaphysics is also described. Also, he takes opportunity to disprove and refute some of the views of idealistic philosophers. Because the idealistic philosophers have certain positions which underlie their delineation of philosophy, postulation of philosophy. So wherever possible, he has also disproved them, refuted their stance, like heterodox philosophers such as the philosophies of nihilism, panpsychism, momentarism. So these are also refuted. So therefore, he takes that role of a philosopher even while dealing with vibhutis. So these glorious siddhis are described wherever possible with reference to the siddhi. The metaphysics is described, logic is described, reasoning is described, which gives the intellectual flavor to the topic. And the grahitu support and grahana support and grahya support tells us about the whole realm of powers and prowess that the yogi gets. And while such samadhi is taking place, the samadhi is a great transformation. And therefore he deals with the whole process of transformation of a yogi, the chitta of a yogi, who goes into samadhi. So these are incredible delineations on, if I may say so, psychology of samadhi processes. So the paranamas are described, and with that he has so worded these paranamas that even our chitta, which is undergoing paranama, we mortals, our chitta undergoing paranamas in the mortal realm and mortal gravities also they get described. The yogi's chitta transforms into what is called as nirodha paranama, samadhi paranama, ekagrata paranama. While we mortals, our paranamas are also pointed out in that description. We have Vyuthana paranama, Avyagrata paranama, and Sarvarthata paranama. So our mind becomes outgoing, mind starts wandering, mind starts rambling, mind starts going all worlds, all object worlds. So our chitta paranam also gets described in an indirect way while he is describing yogi's chitta paranamas. Then the paranama in the universe, the whole phenomenal universe is undergoing paranamas constantly. That's what is called as change. That also gets described, and therefore he gives strength to the position that what we have around and what we have where we are is universe and not diverse. It is universe. And it is cosmos and not chaos. So Bhutendra Paranamas also get described. That is, the phenomenal universe also is undergoing change, but the change has a scheme whereby it remains cosmos and it remains universe. So the whole theory of Paranama also comes in, which is a metaphysical aspect. So with this, these glorious siddhis, Jnana Rupa and Kriya Rupa siddhis, this chapter comes to an end, and a siddhi lands into Kaivalya as well. So that also gets mentioned, the siddhi that can get into Kaivalya. Rather, giving up all the siddhis and to be disinterested in siddhis can land into Kaivalya. So the Kaivalya also gets described in this chapter. So other dimensions of Kaivalya get described. There are two sutras with reference to Kaivalya here. The two sutras have come in the earlier part of the text. So different dimensions of Kaivalya are described. One more definition of Kaivalya is yet to come. So the Kaivalya gets described in Patanjali's text very, very comprehensively, and two sutras are dedicated here in Vibhuti Pada. So very interesting topic comes to an end. It's not just taking us into the clouds of imaginations and glories, but also tell us about some metaphysics behind all that happens to a yogi and all that is happening in the world, in the universe. So there is a great amount of metaphysics as well. So the overview of this chapter is really mind-boggling. Enormous topics are covered, and enormous knowledge comes our way, although just by conceptual knowledge or notional knowledge, great amount of knowledge comes our way as well. So these are not only siddhis for a yogi, but something for us as an attainment also comes by this chapter. We start going the metaphysics of Bhuta Srushti, Bhutendriya Srushti, Indriyatmaka Srushti, living, non-living creations. So great amount of knowledge has come in this chapter. Okay.
Let's recite the shlokas on Guruji and stop for today. Vaijñānikam pravaktritva आसनेषु कलाविदम् योगाभ्यासे च तत्त्वज्ञम् वन्देऽहं सुन्दरं गुरुम् योगवृक्षो हि लोकेऽस्मिन् यत्प्रेरणेन वर्धितः योगाचार्य गुरो तुभ्यं सुन्दराय नमो नमः. Thank you.
Namaskar all of you.